On May 28, 1980, a 32-year-old woman named Dorothy Jane Scott drove two co-workers to the emergency room at UC Irvine Medical Center. One of them had been bitten by a black widow spider. Dorothy waited with them. She helped them.
It was a spider bite, so they gave him an antibiotic.
And when it was time to leave, she walked out to the parking lot to bring her car around to the entrance, so her sick co-worker wouldn't have to walk too far. Her car came back. She did not. The white Toyota station wagon accelerated toward her two co-workers, headlights blinding them, and sped past without stopping. They couldn't see who was behind the wheel. They assumed it was Dorothy, that she had received an emergency call about her 4-year-old son and rushed off. They waited. They called her parents. No one had heard from her. At 4:30 the next morning, her car was found burning in an alley 10 miles away. The fire had been set in the passenger seat. Dorothy was gone. Her purse was gone. And the man who had been stalking her for months, the man who had called her at work, who had described what she was wearing, who had left a dead red rose on her windshield, had her. For 4 years afterward, her parents received phone calls. The voice was male. The question was always the same. Is Dorothy home? Sometimes he said he had killed her. Sometimes he said she was alive. He never said his name. He never stayed on the line long enough to be traced. And then, in August 1984, after Dorothy's remains were found in a shallow grave near Santa Ana Canyon Road, after the news went public, after her mother identified the turquoise ring and the watch stopped at 12:30, the phone rang one last time. Is Dorothy home? Then silence. 45 years of silence. This is the case of Dorothy Jane Scott, and this is the open file. Dorothy Jane Scott was 32 years old in the spring of 1980. She was a single mother raising a 4-year-old boy named Sean. They lived in Stanton, California, a quiet pocket of Orange County, southeast of Los Angeles, with Dorothy's aunt. Her parents, Jacob and Vera Scott, lived nearby in Anaheim. They helped care for Sean while Dorothy worked. The family was close. The structure was stable. The life was ordinary.
Probably one of the most giving people that I've ever met in my life. If you were outside and it was freezing cold and you needed a shirt, she would take it off her back and give it to you.
Dorothy worked as a secretary for 2 jointly owned stores in Anaheim, Swinger's Psych Shop and Custom John's Head Shop. The stores sold counterculture items, posters, lava lamps, the kind of psychedelic decor that was popular in the late 1970s. Dorothy handled administrative work in the back office. She was not on the sales floor. She was not the face of the business. She did her job quietly and competently, and she went home. She was a devout Christian. She did not drink or use drugs. She preferred staying home to going out. Her co-workers described her as quiet, reliable, deeply devoted to her son and her faith. She dated occasionally, but there was no steady boyfriend. There was no ex-husband with a grudge. There was no secret life that anyone could point to. There was, however, the phone. Months before she disappeared, Dorothy began receiving anonymous calls at work, a male voice. At first, the caller sounded infatuated. He told her she was beautiful. He told her he wanted to take her out, but he would not give his name, and the calls did not stop. They came during the day, during her shifts, at unpredictable intervals. The pattern of someone who knew when she would be at her desk. Dorothy told her mother about the calls. She said the voice sounded familiar, someone she knew or had known. but could not place. And then the tone began to change. The caller knew things he should not have known. He described what Dorothy had been wearing earlier that day. He described what time she had left work. He told her where she had been. The messages were not guesses. They were surveillance reports. The man on the phone was watching her. Then the threats began. The caller told Dorothy he would get her alone. He told her he would cut her up into pieces so small that no one would ever find her. He alternated, without warning, between declarations of love and descriptions of violence.
Did the calls escalate into even more intimidating threats?
Yes. Towards the end, the unknown caller had made threats to harm her or sexually assault her. He said, "I intend to cut you up into bits."
The two intertwined in a way that made it clear they were not opposites to him, but versions of the same impulse, different expressions of the same need to possess. One day he called and told her to go outside. He had left something for her. Dorothy walked to her car and found a single red rose lying across the windshield, but the rose was dead. The gesture that was supposed to be romantic was instead a threat. "I was here. I stood beside your car. I left this for you. The next thing I leave might be different." Dorothy was terrified. She told her mother about the rose. She told her co-workers about the calls. She began taking karate lessons. She considered buying a handgun. She was not passive in the face of what was happening to her. She recognized it for what it was. Stalking of the most dangerous kind, the stalker who does not hide in the shadows but announces himself, who wants to be known and unknown at the same time, who derives pleasure from the fear he creates. But in 1980, there was no word for what Dorothy was experiencing, not in the legal system, not in the culture. Stalking was not a crime in California until 1990. The police could not do much. The phone company could not easily trace calls, especially calls that lasted only seconds, calls where the caller hung up before a trace could be completed. Dorothy was, in effect, on her own. And then, on the night of May 28th, 1980, her own was not enough. On the evening of May 28th, 1980, Dorothy attended a staff meeting at Swinger's Psych Shop. During the meeting, she noticed that one of her co-workers, Conrad Bostrom, looked unwell. There was a red mark on his arm. Dorothy suspected a spider bite. She was right. It was a black widow. Dorothy and another co-worker, Pam Head, drove Bostrom to the emergency room at UCI Medical Center. On the way, they stopped at Dorothy's parents' house so she could check on Sean. While she was there, she changed her scarf from a black one to a red one. A detail so small it should not have mattered. A detail that would later prove that someone was paying very close attention. At the hospital, Bostrom was treated and discharged around 11 p.m. He was still feeling unwell. Dorothy offered to walk to the parking lot alone and bring the car around to the hospital entrance. She did not want him to exert himself. It was a small kindness, the kind of thing a thoughtful person does without thinking. Pam Head would later say that she was with Dorothy the entire time they were at the hospital. Dorothy never left her side. She never made a phone call. She used the restroom briefly, and then she walked out the doors into the parking lot alone. Pam and Conrad waited at the hospital entrance. After a few minutes, they walked out to the parking lot to look for her. And then they saw Dorothy's car, a white 1973 Toyota station wagon, speeding toward them. The headlights were on the high beam, blinding them. They waved their arms, trying to flag her down. The car accelerated past them without stopping. It took a sharp right turn out of the parking lot and disappeared. They could not see who was driving. The headlights made it impossible. They assumed it was Dorothy, that she had received an emergency call about her son and had rushed off. They waited for 2 hours. They called her parents. Her parents had not heard from her. Sean was fine, asleep at their house, untouched by whatever was unfolding 10 miles away. At 4:30 a.m. on May 29th, Dorothy's car was found burning in an alley in Santa Ana, 10 miles from the hospital. The fire had been deliberately set, and it appeared to have started in the passenger seat. Dorothy was gone. Her purse was gone. Everything that might have identified what had happened inside the car was reduced to ash and melted metal. On June 12, 1980, 2 weeks after Dorothy disappeared, the Orange County Register ran a story about the case. It was a missing person article, the kind that appears and disappears in a news cycle, the kind that families clip and save and hope someone will see. That day, the managing editor at the Register received a phone call. The caller was a man. He was crying. He said he had killed Dorothy Jane Scott. He said she was his love. He said he had caught her cheating with another man and that she had denied it, and so he had killed her. Then the caller offered 2 details that had not been published in the Register article. He knew that Conrad Bostrom had been bitten by a black widow spider on the night of May 28th, and he knew that Dorothy had changed her scarf from black to red at her parents' house on the way to the hospital. Neither of these facts had appeared in the newspaper. Neither had been disclosed publicly. The only people who could have known both details were the people who were at the hospital that night, or the person who had taken Dorothy from the parking lot. The caller also claimed that Dorothy had phoned him from the hospital that evening. Pam had disputed this immediately and absolutely. She had been with Dorothy the entire time they were at the hospital. Dorothy had not made any phone calls. She had not left Pam's side except to use the restroom. Whoever the caller was, he was lying about that, but telling the truth about everything else. Investigators believed then, and believe now, that the anonymous caller was Dorothy's killer. He had motive, jealousy, a belief, real or delusional, that Dorothy had been unfaithful to him. He had knowledge, the spider bite, the scarf, and he had access. He knew when she was at the hospital, knew when she was alone in the parking lot, knew when to strike, but he did not give his name, and the call was not traced. And the man who knew everything about Dorothy's last night, the man who had probably taken her, probably burned her car, probably killed her, remained a voice on a telephone and nothing more. About a week after Dorothy disappeared, the phone rang at Jacob and Vera Scott's house. Vera answered. A male voice said, "I've got her," and hung up. The calls became regular. Almost every Wednesday afternoon, the phone would ring. Vera, home alone, Jacob at work, would answer. The voice would ask the same question. "Is Dorothy home?" Sometimes the caller said he had killed her. Sometimes he said she was alive and safe with him. Sometimes he just asked the question, "Is Dorothy home?" and hung up, as though the cruelty of the question was the point, as though hearing Vera's silence was what he wanted. The police attempted to trace the calls, but the caller never stayed on the line long enough. In 1980, tracing a call required time, minutes, not seconds, and the caller knew this. He was disciplined. He never slipped. He never gave a name, a location, a clue. He asked his question. He listened to the answer, or the silence, and then he was gone. Vera Scott never changed her phone number. She told people she hoped that one day the caller would let Dorothy speak, that the phone would ring, and it would be her daughter's voice on the other end, alive, asking to come home. She knew this was irrational. She knew Dorothy was almost certainly dead, but the phone line was a connection, the only one she had left, and she could not bring herself to sever it. In April 1984, the pattern broke. The phone rang in the evening, and Jacob answered instead of Vera. The caller hung up immediately, and then the call stopped. For 4 months, there was silence. The implication was as clear as it was chilling. The caller knew the household's rhythms. He called when Vera was alone. He stopped when Jacob answered. He was watching the house, or had watched it long enough to know exactly when Vera would be there by herself, vulnerable, waiting for a phone call that would never bring her daughter back. On August 6, 1984, more than 4 years after Dorothy disappeared, a construction worker found human remains about 30 feet from Santa Ana Canyon Road in Anaheim Hills. The bones were partially charred and buried alongside the remains of a dog. A brush fire had swept through the area in 1982, scorching the site and destroying much of the forensic evidence that a body can offer. Among the bones, investigators found 2 items, a turquoise ring and a wristwatch. The watch had stopped at 12:30 a.m. on May 29, 1980. Approximately 1 hour after Pam Head and Conrad Bostrom last saw Dorothy's car speeding out of the hospital parking lot, Vera Scott identified the ring and the watch as belonging to her daughter. On August 14th, dental records confirmed what Vera already knew. The bones were Dorothy's. The search that had lasted 4 years was over. The hope, however irrational, however impossible, was extinguished. An autopsy could not determine the cause of death. The remains were too degraded, the fire damage too extensive, the time elapsed too long. Dorothy had been dead for years, possibly since the night she was taken. The watch stopped at 12:30 a.m. was the only clue, a suggestion that whatever happened within an hour of the parking lot. A memorial service was held on August 22nd, 1984. The family gathered. The co-workers attended. Sean, now 8 years old enough to understand that his mother was never coming home, was there. The service was titled Dorothy Lives, an attempt to claim something from the silence, but the silence was not finished with the Scott family. After the discovery of Dorothy's remains made the news, the phone rang at Jacob and Vera's house one more time. The same voice, the same question. Is Dorothy home? And then, nothing. The call stopped forever. The man who had tormented the Scotts for 4 years, who had asked a question he already knew the answer to, who had called a newspaper to confess and a mother to gloat. That man had said everything he intended to say. He had left his mark. And then he vanished into the same silence he had created. The caller's stated motive, when he called the Orange County Register, when he was crying, when he was confessing, was jealousy. He said Dorothy had been cheating on him. He said she had denied it, and so he killed her. Investigators have never publicly identified a boyfriend, a lover, or even a serious romantic interest in Dorothy's life. She dated occasionally. There was no steady relationship. There was no one who would have described himself as her partner, let alone as someone with the right to police her fidelity. This has led to a persistent theory that the stalker was someone who believed himself to be in a relationship with Dorothy, even though she did not share that belief. A delusion of intimacy, a fixation that existed entirely in his mind, the kind of obsession where a single kind word becomes proof of love, where a smile becomes a promise, where rejection, real or perceived, becomes justification for violence. The caller's specific reference to Conrad Bostron is significant. He mentioned the spider bite. He mentioned the hospital. He seemed to believe that Dorothy's kindness toward a sick co-worker was evidence of infidelity. That by driving Bostron to the emergency room, by waiting with him, by offering to bring the car around so he wouldn't have to walk, Dorothy was betraying him. The jealousy was not rational. It did not need to be. It only needed to feel, to the person experiencing it, like a justification. Dorothy told her mother that the caller's voice sounded familiar. She could not place it, but the voice was not a stranger's, not entirely. It was someone she knew, or someone who had been around her long enough to become familiar without becoming memorable. A co-worker, a customer, a friend of a friend. Someone who moved through the same spaces she did, close enough to hear, but not close enough to be seen. No one has ever been arrested for the murder of Dorothy Jane Scott. No suspect has ever been publicly named. The man on the phone, the man who cried and confessed and asked for 4 years whether Dorothy was home, is still a voice and nothing more. The investigation into Dorothy's disappearance and murder focused, in part, on the people who were with her on the night of May 28th. Pam Head was cooperative with investigators. She provided a detailed account of the evening. She was adamant that Dorothy had not left her side at the hospital, had not made a phone call, had not spoken to anyone outside the building. She had simply walked to the parking lot to get the car, and then the car had come back with someone else at the wheel. Conrad Bostron was the reason they were at the hospital. The Black Widow bite was genuine. Medical records confirmed it. He was treated and discharged. He was still unwell. He had no obvious motive to harm Dorothy, who had been kind to him, who had driven him to get help, who had waited with him while he was treated. But the caller knew about the spider bite, and the caller seemed to believe that Bostron was the other man, the person Dorothy had been unfaithful with. This raises an unsettling question. If the killer was not Bostron himself, then the killer was someone who was watching closely enough to know Bostron's medical condition and to interpret Dorothy's kindness as infidelity. The caller also knew about the scarf, the detail that Dorothy had changed from black to red at her parents' house. This detail narrows the circle. It means the caller was either at the hospital and observed the scarf change, meaning he saw Dorothy that night, or had been told about it by someone who was there, or he had been following Dorothy all evening, watching her stop at her parents' house, watching her change her clothes, watching her every move. None of this evidence points to a specific person, but it points to a specific type of person, someone close, someone watching, someone who believed he had a claim on Dorothy that she did not acknowledge, someone who was willing to kill her rather than let her be kind to someone else. The call stopped in August 1984. The man who had asked, "Is Dorothy home?" more than 100 times, every Wednesday for 4 years, never called again. What remained was silence, the kind of silence that settles over a case when the leads run out, when the evidence degrades, when the witnesses move away or die, when the file is moved from active investigation to cold case and no one expects it to move back. Jacob Scott died in 1994. He had spent 14 years waiting for someone to be arrested for his daughter's murder. He died without that satisfaction. Vera Scott died in 2002. She had spent 22 years answering a phone that might ring hoping, against all evidence, against all logic, against the bones she had identified as her daughter's, that the caller would one day let Dorothy speak. Sean Scott was 4 years old when his mother disappeared. He grew up without her. He is now in his late 40s. In 2017, he gave an interview to a crime blogger. One of the few times he has spoken publicly about the case. He said he remembered very little of his mother. He remembered the turquoise ring. He remembered a woman who loved him. And he remembered the absence that followed. The years without her, the silence that filled the space where she should have been. The Orange County Sheriff's Department maintains that the case is still open. The file is still accessible. The evidence, what remains of it, is still stored. But no new leads have emerged in decades. The man on the phone, if he is still alive, would be in his 70s or 80s. He has kept his secret for 45 years. He may take it to his grave, if he has not already. The watch is the only witness that has ever spoken. It stopped at 12:30 a.m. on May 29th, 1980. Dorothy was last seen, or more precisely, her car was last seen, at approximately 11:15 p.m. The 60 to 75 minutes between the parking lot and the watch's final tick is the window. Whatever happened to Dorothy Jane Scott happened in that hour. The distance from UC Irvine Medical Center to the alley where her car was found burning is about 10 miles. A 10-mile drive in 1980 took 15 or 20 minutes. The fire was reported at 4:30 a.m., hours after the car was abandoned. The timeline suggests the killer took Dorothy from the parking lot, drove her to a location, killed her, or drove her somewhere else and killed her later, and then returned to burn the car. Or he burned the car first and took her somewhere else afterward. The body was not found with the car. It was found 4 years later, 30 feet off Santa Ana Canyon Road. A different location entirely. The killer had time to dispose of the body in one place, dispose of the car in another, and vanish. The watch stopped at 12:30 a.m. was not necessarily the moment of death. It could have been damaged during a struggle. It could have been removed and discarded. It could have simply run out of battery, coincidentally, on the night Dorothy disappeared. But the watch tells us something. It tells us that by 12:30 a.m., an hour after the hospital parking lot, Dorothy was no longer in control of her own possessions. The ring and the watch were with the body when it was buried. The purse was never found. The scarf, the red scarf she had changed into at her parents' house, was never found. The woman who had been stalked, threatened, and hunted was dead, and the man who had done it had taken everything that could identify him and had left only the things that could not speak. It is impossible to evaluate the Dorothy Jane Scott case without confronting what was not available in 1980. There was no stalking law. California did not criminalize stalking until 1990. 10 years after Dorothy disappeared, the police could not arrest the man calling her because calling someone repeatedly and making threats was not, in 1980, a crime. The best they could do was take a report and wait for something worse to happen. And by the time something worse happened, it was too late to do anything at all. Telephone traces were primitive. A trace required the caller to stay on the line for several minutes, sometimes longer. The caller knew this. His calls to Vera Scott lasted seconds. The trace never completed. The phone company could not help. The technology that would later make tracing instantaneous did not exist. There was no DNA testing. The car was burned. any biological evidence inside was destroyed. The body was exposed to a brush fire and 4 years of decomposition. Even if forensic evidence had survived, the tools to analyze it, PCR amplification, STR profiling, the databases that now connect offenders across jurisdictions, were decades away. There were no surveillance cameras in the hospital parking lot, no cell phone pings to track, no digital footprint to trace. The killer moved through a world that was largely unobserved, and when he wanted to be seen, he used a phone and a voice, the most untraceable tools available at the time. None of this excuses what happened, but it explains why it happened the way it did. Dorothy Jane Scott was stalked and murdered in an era when the legal system had not yet recognized stalking as a crime, when the technology to catch her killer did not exist, and when the only evidence the killer left behind was a voice on a telephone. Familiar enough to be recognized, but not familiar enough to be named. Dorothy Jane Scott was 32 years old when she was taken from a hospital parking lot in Orange County, California. She was a mother. She was a daughter. She was a secretary who worked in a back office and went home to her son and her aunt and her quiet, ordinary life. She did not invite the attention that killed her. She did nothing to deserve it. She was targeted by a man who believed he had a claim on her, and when she did not acknowledge that claim, because she did not know it existed, he killed her. She was stalked for months before she died. She knew she was in danger. She took karate. She considered buying a gun. She told her mother. She told her co-workers. She did everything that a person could do in 1980. And it was not enough, because the system around her had not yet evolved to protect women like her from men like him. The man who killed her called a newspaper to confess. He cried. He said he was jealous. He offered proof that only the killer could have. Details about a spider bite and a scarf. Details that had not been made public. Details that confirmed his involvement beyond any reasonable doubt. And then he hung up, and the police could not trace the call, and he remained free. He called Dorothy's parents for 4 years. He asked them whether Dorothy was home, a question he knew the answer to, a question designed to cause pain, a question that served no purpose except cruelty. He called on Wednesdays when Vera was alone. He never gave his name. He never stayed on the line. He stopped calling when Jacob answered the phone. And then, after Dorothy's remains were found, he called one final time. "Is Dorothy home?" and vanished into silence. Jacob Scott died in 1994. Vera Scott died in 2002. Neither ever knew who killed their daughter. Neither ever saw an arrest. Neither ever heard the voice on the phone identified, named, held accountable. They died with the same question hanging over them that had hung over them since May 29th, 1980. Who did this? And why? And how does a man kill a woman, confess to a newspaper, torment her parents for 4 years and walk away? Sean Scott was 4 when his mother disappeared. He is now approaching 50. He has lived more than 4 decades without her, longer than she lived herself. The turquoise ring and the watch stopped at 12:30 a.m. are still in an evidence locker. The case file is still open. The killer, if he is still alive, is still free. The question that the caller asked for 4 years has never been answered. Is Dorothy home? No, she's not home. She has never been home. She was taken from a parking lot when she was 32 years old, and she has been gone for 45 years, and she is not coming back. The phone in her parents' house has been silent for decades. The voice that tormented her family is silent too. And somewhere, in the silence between the hospital and the burning car, between the phone calls and the shallow grave, between a mother who died waiting and a son who grew up without her, the truth of what happened to Dorothy Jane Scott is still waiting. It is a case with no arrests, no named suspect, no resolution. And yet, nearly half a century later, the silence around it is still loud.